You might imagine time travel as science fiction, but for ancient Egyptian temporal engineers, it was less about theoretical possibility and more about practical necessity that came around every season, like an especially precise calendar that didn't believe in linear progression. Picture this: you're living in chambers where yesterday and tomorrow exist simultaneously, with specific protocols that govern temporal navigation and reality management that make modern physics look like children playing with building blocks. We're diving into the Egyptian facilities that archaeologists have been systematically covering up for over a century, not because they don't work, but because they work too well. These aren't theoretical time machines or Hollywood special effects. These are fully operational temporal manipulation chambers that are still being used today by teams that don't officially exist, manipulating historical events and managing timeline stability in ways that would terrify anyone who understood the implications. Forget everything you think you know about ancient Egyptian civilization being limited to pyramids and mummies. What we're talking about tonight are sophisticated temporal engineering facilities that control causality itself, with technologies that make contemporary physics look like medieval superstition and safety protocols that exist because the alternative is reality collapse. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Congratulations! You've just woken up as Dr. Sarah Chen in October 1987, and you're about to discover that time isn't linear, history isn't fixed, and the ancient Egyptians solved problems by simply going back and preventing them from happening in the first place. The good news? You're about to explore the most sophisticated temporal engineering in human history. The bad news? You're about to learn why these chambers were sealed, and why that reason still threatens anyone who discovers them today. Welcome to the temporal facilities that make surface Egyptian civilization look like a cover story. You're standing in what was supposed to be a sealed storage chamber beneath the Cairo Museum, investigating reports of electrical anomalies that have been disrupting the building's power systems. But the hieroglyphic inscriptions on the walls aren't describing funeral rites or religious ceremonies. They're providing operational instructions for temporal navigation equipment that shouldn't exist in any historical period, much less ancient Egypt. The chamber itself defies conventional archaeology because the construction techniques demonstrate understanding of dimensional physics and temporal mechanics that contemporary science is still trying to develop. The walls aren't just carved stone. They're composed of materials that seem to exist in multiple temporal states simultaneously, creating surfaces that appear solid but occasionally flicker with images of the chamber at different time periods. Your electromagnetic field detector starts producing readings that indicate massive energy fluctuations, occurring in patterns that suggest controlled temporal manipulation rather than random electrical problems. The energy signatures match theoretical models for temporal field generation, but the power levels required for this type of temporal manipulation would require technology that exceeds anything in contemporary physics. The hieroglyphic instructions include detailed diagrams showing temporal navigation procedures, safety protocols for timeline management, and warning symbols that clearly indicate the dangers of improper temporal manipulation. The inscriptions assume knowledge of advanced physics and temporal engineering that ancient Egyptians supposedly didn't possess, suggesting that either historical understanding of Egyptian capabilities is completely wrong, or these inscriptions were created by people who had access to temporal technology. As you examine the chamber more carefully, you notice that the electrical anomalies affecting the museum correspond exactly to the temporal energy patterns described in the hieroglyphic instructions. The chamber isn't just containing temporal technology, it's actively operating, conducting temporal manipulations that are affecting local space-time and causing the electrical disruptions that brought you here. The most disturbing aspect of your discovery is evidence that the chamber has been accessed recently by people who possess detailed knowledge of temporal engineering and ancient Egyptian technology. Modern equipment fragments show signs of temporal exposure, and certain hieroglyphic panels have been recently cleaned and studied, indicating ongoing research by teams that understand both the ancient technology and its contemporary implications. Your investigation reveals that the temporal chamber isn't isolated. It's connected to a network of similar facilities throughout Egypt and possibly other locations worldwide. The connections involve both physical tunnels and temporal linkages that allow coordination between different temporal manipulation sites while maintaining security and preventing unauthorized access to temporal technology. The chamber includes safety systems that monitor temporal stability and automatically implement corrective measures if temporal manipulations threaten timeline integrity. The safety protocols demonstrate understanding of temporal mechanics that exceeds contemporary theoretical physics, with fail-safe systems that prevent temporal paradoxes and reality collapse scenarios that modern temporal theory warns about but doesn't know how to prevent. Your examination of the temporal control systems reveals interface devices that respond to your presence by displaying information in multiple languages, including ancient Egyptian, classical Greek, medieval Arabic, and contemporary English. The multilingual capability suggests that the temporal facility has been maintained and upgraded throughout historical periods by people who understood its operation and significance. The most shocking discovery is documentation showing that the temporal chamber has been used to influence major historical events throughout recorded history. The records include temporal manipulations that prevented disasters, guided technological development, and influenced political decisions while maintaining the appearance of natural historical progression and preventing detection by surface populations. The temporal logs document specific missions that altered historical timelines to prevent nuclear warfare, environmental collapse, and social chaos that would have threatened global civilization. The interventions were carefully planned and executed to achieve desired outcomes while minimizing temporal disruption and maintaining historical plausibility. As you study the temporal control systems and historical records, you begin to understand that the chamber represents technology that allows direct manipulation of causality and historical development. The implications for understanding history, physics, and human development are so profound that you understand why this information has been suppressed and why access to temporal technology has been restricted to authorized personnel only. Your portable temporal scanner begins detecting temporal energy buildups that indicate the chamber is preparing for another temporal manipulation mission. The energy pattern suggests that someone is planning to conduct temporal operations that will affect contemporary events, and your unauthorized presence in the chamber may have triggered security protocols that could result in your elimination or temporal displacement. Welcome to the realization that ancient Egyptian civilization included temporal engineering capabilities that allowed direct control over historical development, and that modern authorities have been using this technology to manage global events while maintaining public ignorance about temporal manipulation and its role in shaping contemporary civilization. The temporal navigation systems in the Egyptian chamber operate according to principles that make contemporary physics look like elementary school mathematics, using technologies that manipulate the fundamental structure of space-time to allow precise movement through temporal dimensions while maintaining travelers' existence and preventing paradox formation. Your examination of the navigation interface reveals control systems that provide precise temporal coordinates using a mathematical framework that describes time as a navigable dimensional space with specific locations, pathways, and destinations that can be reached through calculated temporal manipulations. The navigation mathematics operate beyond current understanding of temporal mechanics. The temporal coordinate system divides history into specific temporal zones with unique identification codes that allow precise targeting of specific time periods, geographical locations, and even individual moments within historical events. The coordinate precision exceeds anything that contemporary temporal theory considers possible, with accuracy measured in seconds rather than years or decades. The navigation controls include safety protocols that prevent temporal travelers from materializing inside solid objects, arriving during dangerous historical events, or creating temporal paradoxes that could destabilize local timelines. The safety systems demonstrate understanding of temporal hazards that contemporary physics can identify theoretically, but cannot prevent practically. Your investigation of the temporal pathway systems reveals that time travel isn't simply jumping between different time periods. It involves following specific temporal routes that maintain timeline stability while allowing access to desired historical destinations. The pathways function like temporal highways with established routes, entry points, and safety regulations. The navigation records document thousands of successful temporal missions conducted throughout history, with detailed logs showing departure and arrival coordinates, mission objectives, and outcome assessments. The mission records indicate that temporal travel has been conducted regularly for centuries, or possibly millennia, by teams that possess advanced training in temporal navigation and historical intervention. The temporal mapping systems provide comprehensive charts of historical periods, showing temporal accessibility, security risks, and intervention opportunities for different time periods and geographical locations. The temporal maps identify safe arrival zones, historical events that can be influenced without causing paradoxes, and time periods that are restricted due to temporal instability or security concerns. Your examination of the temporal communication systems reveals that the chamber maintains contact with temporal travelers during missions through quantum communication channels that operate across temporal dimensions. The communication capabilities allow real-time coordination between different time periods and provide emergency assistance if temporal missions encounter problems or security threats. The navigation training materials include comprehensive instruction programs that teach temporal navigation principles, safety procedures, and mission protocols to authorized personnel. The training systems demonstrate that temporal travel requires extensive preparation and specialized knowledge to prevent temporal accidents and timeline disruption. The temporal transportation technology includes personal devices that allow individual temporal travel, as well as larger systems that can transport equipment, materials, and multiple personnel through temporal dimensions. The transportation capabilities suggest that temporal missions can involve substantial resources and personnel rather than just individual time travelers. Your exploration reveals that the temporal navigation systems are integrated with global monitoring networks that track timeline stability and identify temporal anomalies that could threaten historical integrity. The monitoring capabilities provide early warning of temporal problems and coordinate corrective actions to maintain timeline stability. The navigation systems include contingency protocols for temporal emergencies, including timeline collapse, paradox formation, and temporal invasion scenarios. The emergency procedures demonstrate understanding of temporal threats that contemporary physics can identify but cannot address, with response capabilities that exceed current theoretical understanding. The most remarkable aspect of the temporal navigation systems is their ability to maintain precise control over temporal manipulations while preventing the butterfly effect scenarios that contemporary temporal theory warns about. The control systems achieve temporal precision that allows historical intervention without causing unintended consequences or timeline disruption. Your examination of recent navigation logs reveals that temporal missions are currently being conducted to influence contemporary events while maintaining secrecy about temporal manipulation capabilities. The current operations suggest that temporal technology is being used to manage modern global development according to strategic objectives that prioritize timeline stability over surface political processes. As you study the temporal navigation systems and mission records, you begin to understand that temporal travel represents practical technology rather than theoretical possibility, with operational capabilities that allow systematic historical intervention while maintaining the appearance of natural historical development. The realization that ancient Egyptian temporal engineering includes navigation systems that exceed contemporary theoretical understanding makes you recognize that time travel isn't science fiction, but operational technology that has been influencing historical development while remaining hidden from surface awareness and academic understanding. The timeline management systems in the temporal chamber operate as sophisticated monitoring and control networks that maintain historical stability while allowing controlled interventions that guide historical development without causing paradoxes or timeline collapse scenarios that could threaten the existence of contemporary civilization. Your investigation of the timeline monitoring systems reveals comprehensive surveillance networks that track historical events across all time periods simultaneously, identifying potential timeline disruptions and coordinating corrective actions to maintain historical integrity. The monitoring capabilities exceed anything that contemporary physics considers theoretically possible. The timeline stability algorithms calculate the potential consequences of temporal interventions before they are implemented, ensuring that historical changes achieve desired outcomes without creating butterfly effect scenarios that could cause unintended historical alterations. The calculation systems demonstrate understanding of causality, mathematics, that contemporary science hasn't developed. The historical intervention protocols include detailed procedures for influencing specific historical events while maintaining the appearance of natural historical development. The intervention strategies are designed to achieve strategic objectives while preventing detection by historical populations and maintaining plausible historical progression. Your examination of the timeline correction systems reveals that the temporal facility includes technologies for reversing temporal damage and restoring original timelines if interventions cause unintended consequences. The correction capabilities provide fail-safe mechanisms that prevent permanent timeline disruption and allow recovery from temporal accidents. The timeline management records document extensive historical interventions that have prevented wars, guided technological development, and influenced social changes while maintaining historical plausibility. The intervention records show systematic efforts to optimize historical development while preserving the essential character of human civilization and cultural development. The temporal coordination systems manage multiple simultaneous temporal missions to prevent conflicts between different intervention teams and ensure that temporal operations support consistent strategic objectives. The coordination capabilities allow complex temporal operations involving multiple time periods and intervention points. Your investigation reveals that timeline management includes contingency planning for various historical scenarios, including preventing nuclear warfare, managing environmental disasters, and guiding political development to maintain global stability. The contingency plans demonstrate comprehensive understanding of historical trends and intervention capabilities. The timeline maintenance systems include automated protocols that monitor historical development and implement minor corrections to prevent timeline drift that could accumulate into major historical alterations. The maintenance capabilities ensure long-term timeline stability without requiring constant manual intervention and oversight. The historical analysis systems provide comprehensive understanding of causality, relationships, and historical trends that allow precise prediction of intervention consequences. The analysis capabilities exceed contemporary historical understanding by providing mathematical models of historical development that contemporary historians cannot achieve. Your exploration of the timeline security systems reveals protocols for protecting temporal facilities and preventing unauthorized access to temporal technology. The security measures include temporal camouflage, automated defense systems, and elimination protocols for security threats that could compromise temporal operations or timeline stability. The timeline management includes protocols for managing temporal tourists and unauthorized time travelers who could disrupt historical events or compromise temporal security. The management systems demonstrate that temporal technology requires careful control to prevent misuse and protect historical integrity. The most disturbing aspect of timeline management is evidence that contemporary history has been extensively modified through temporal interventions that prevented disasters and guided development while maintaining the illusion of natural historical progression. The modifications suggest that surface understanding of history represents managed narrative rather than actual historical development. Your examination of current timeline management operations reveals ongoing interventions that are influencing contemporary political, economic, and social development while preventing surface detection of temporal manipulation. The current operations suggest that modern events are being managed through temporal technology rather than occurring through natural political and social processes. The timeline management systems include long-term strategic planning that guides historical development over centuries or millennia to achieve specific civilization outcomes. The strategic planning operates on timescales that exceed surface political and social planning while maintaining consistency with natural historical development patterns. As you study the timeline management systems and intervention records, you begin to understand that human history represents a managed development process guided through temporal interventions rather than natural social and political evolution. The timeline management reveals systematic efforts to optimize human civilization development while maintaining surface ignorance about temporal manipulation. The realization that timeline management systems allow systematic control over historical development makes you recognize that contemporary understanding of history, politics, and social development may represent managed narrative designed to conceal the reality of temporal manipulation and its role in shaping human civilization. The personnel files and training records in the temporal facility reveal that temporal operations are conducted by carefully selected and extensively trained individuals who possess exceptional psychological stability, advanced technical knowledge, and complete loyalty to temporal security protocols that prioritize timeline stability over personal interests or surface political affiliations. Your examination of the recruitment protocols reveals that temporal personnel are selected through comprehensive psychological evaluations, genetic screening, and temporal compatibility testing that identifies individuals who can survive temporal travel without psychological breakdown or temporal displacement syndrome. The selection process operates beyond contemporary understanding of human temporal physiology. The training programs for temporal personnel include extensive education in temporal mechanics, historical knowledge, psychological preparation, and cultural adaptation that prepares operators for missions in any historical period, while maintaining operational security and preventing cultural contamination. The training requirements exceed anything in contemporary specialized education. The psychological preparation systems help temporal personnel develop mental resilience needed to maintain sanity while experiencing temporal displacement, witnessing historical events, and managing the psychological stress of knowing information about historical development that cannot be shared with surface populations. Your investigation of personnel records reveals that temporal operators include individuals from throughout history who were recruited during temporal missions and trained for temporal service. The historical recruitment suggests that temporal operations have been expanding personnel resources by recruiting qualified individuals from different time periods. The temporal personnel include specialists in historical intervention, technical maintenance, temporal navigation, and timeline security who work together in coordinated teams that conduct complex temporal missions. The specialization demonstrates that temporal operations require diverse expertise and careful coordination to achieve mission objectives while maintaining security. The personnel rotation systems manage temporal operators' exposure to temporal stress and prevent psychological breakdown that could result from extended temporal duty. The rotation protocols demonstrate understanding of temporal psychology and the human limitations involved in temporal operations. Your examination of the personnel security protocols reveals extensive background investigations, loyalty assessments, and ongoing monitoring that ensures temporal operators remain committed to temporal security objectives. The security measures include psychological monitoring, communication surveillance, and elimination protocols for security threats. The temporal personnel files document operators who have conducted thousands of temporal missions over careers spanning multiple decades or centuries. The career records indicate that temporal operations provide life extension and health maintenance technologies that allow long-term service while preserving operator effectiveness. The training facilities include temporal simulation systems that allow personnel to practice temporal missions without actual temporal travel. The simulation capabilities provide safe training environments for complex temporal operations while preventing training accidents that could compromise timeline stability or operator safety. Your investigation reveals that temporal personnel maintain cover identities in surface civilization while conducting temporal missions, with support systems that provide plausible explanations for their activities, prevent surface detection of their temporal affiliations. The cover systems demonstrate sophisticated intelligence and security capabilities. The personnel advancement systems reward temporal operators based on mission success, technical expertise, and loyalty to temporal security objectives. The advancement opportunities include leadership positions, specialized training, and access to advanced temporal technologies that enhance operator capabilities and mission effectiveness. The temporal personnel include administrative and support staff who manage temporal facilities, coordinate missions, and maintain equipment while remaining based in single time periods. The support personnel demonstrate that temporal operations require extensive logistical and administrative support beyond just temporal travelers. The most remarkable aspect of temporal personnel systems is the psychological resilience required to maintain sanity while possessing knowledge about historical development that contradicts surface understanding of history. The personnel demonstrate exceptional mental discipline to prevent accidental disclosure of temporal knowledge. Your examination of current personnel operations reveals that temporal teams are currently conducting missions that influence contemporary events while maintaining cover identities in surface civilization. The current operations suggest that temporal personnel are actively managing modern global development while remaining undetected by surface authorities. The personnel records document cooperation between temporal operators and surface institutions, with temporal personnel serving as advisors, consultants, and decision-makers in surface organizations while secretly serving temporal strategic objectives. The cooperation suggests extensive temporal infiltration of surface institutions. As you study the temporal personnel systems and operational records, you begin to understand that temporal operations require exceptional human resources with capabilities that exceed normal human psychological and technical abilities. The personnel requirements demonstrate the complexity and challenges of temporal missions. The realization that temporal personnel operate throughout surface civilization while maintaining secret loyalty to temporal organizations makes you recognize that surface institutions may be extensively infiltrated by temporal operators who influence decisions according to temporal strategic objectives rather than surface political processes. The intervention records in the temporal facility document systematic historical manipulations that have prevented disasters, guided technological development, and influenced political decisions throughout recorded history, while maintaining the appearance of natural historical progression and preventing surface detection of temporal influence on historical events. Your examination of the intervention databases reveals that temporal teams have prevented nuclear warfare multiple times throughout the 20th century by manipulating political decisions, technical failures, and communication breakdowns that could have escalated international conflicts into global nuclear exchange. The intervention records show specific instances where temporal manipulation prevented nuclear weapons use. The technological guidance interventions document temporal assistance provided to surface inventors and researchers throughout history, with temporal operators providing selective information and inspiration that guided technological development while maintaining the appearance of natural scientific discovery. The technology guidance explains how surface civilization achieved developments that seem to exceed available knowledge. The political intervention records show temporal manipulation of elections, government decisions, and international negotiations that prevented conflicts and guided political development toward outcomes that maintain global stability. The political interventions demonstrate systematic temporal influence on surface political processes while preserving democratic appearances. Your investigation of disaster prevention interventions reveals temporal missions that prevented natural disasters, industrial accidents, and social catastrophes by implementing minor changes that disrupted causal chains leading to destructive events. The disaster prevention demonstrates temporal ability to prevent suffering while maintaining historical plausibility. The social intervention records document temporal guidance of cultural movements, educational development, and social changes that influenced human development while preserving cultural authenticity. The social interventions show temporal efforts to optimize human social development while maintaining natural cultural evolution patterns. The economic intervention records reveal temporal manipulation of financial markets, trade relationships, and economic policies that prevented economic collapse and guided economic development toward stability and prosperity. The economic interventions demonstrate temporal influence on global economic systems while maintaining free market appearances. Your examination of environmental intervention records shows temporal missions that prevented environmental disasters, guided conservation efforts, and influenced environmental policies that maintain ecological stability. The environmental interventions reveal temporal commitment to environmental protection through historical manipulation rather than contemporary environmental activism. The medical intervention records document temporal assistance provided to medical researchers and healthcare development that accelerated medical progress while maintaining the appearance of natural medical discovery. The medical interventions explain rapid medical advances that seem to exceed available scientific knowledge. The cultural intervention records show temporal influence on artistic development, literary achievements, and cultural innovations that enhanced human cultural development while preserving artistic authenticity. The cultural interventions demonstrate temporal appreciation for human cultural achievement and efforts to optimize cultural development. Your investigation reveals that historical interventions include elimination of individuals whose activities would have threatened timeline stability or global security. The elimination records document temporal assassinations conducted to prevent wars, technological disasters, and social catastrophes that could have caused civilization collapse. The intervention coordination systems manage multiple simultaneous historical interventions to ensure that temporal operations support consistent strategic objectives without creating conflicts between different intervention teams. The coordination demonstrates sophisticated temporal strategic planning and operational management. The intervention assessment systems evaluate the success of historical manipulations and identify unintended consequences that require corrective actions. The assessment capabilities provide feedback mechanisms that improve temporal intervention techniques and prevent intervention mistakes. The most disturbing aspect of historical interventions is evidence that major historical events that surface populations believe occurred naturally were actually managed through temporal manipulation. The intervention records suggest that surface understanding of historical causation represents carefully constructed narrative rather than actual historical development. Your examination of current intervention operations reveals ongoing temporal missions that are influencing contemporary political decisions, technological development, and social changes, while maintaining secrecy about temporal influence on current events. The current interventions suggest that modern global development represents managed process rather than natural political and social evolution. The intervention records include long-term strategic planning that guides historical development over centuries to achieve specific civilization outcomes. The strategic interventions operate according to objectives that prioritize global stability and human survival over surface political preferences and short-term interests. As you study the historical intervention records and operational procedures, you begin to understand that human history represents systematically managed development, guided through temporal manipulation, rather than natural social, political, and technological evolution. The interventions reveal comprehensive temporal control over historical development. The realization that historical interventions have systematically manipulated major historical events makes you recognize that contemporary understanding of history, causation, and social development may represent manufactured narrative designed to conceal the reality of temporal control over human civilization development. The paradox prevention systems in the temporal facility operate as sophisticated mathematical and technological networks that monitor temporal manipulations for potential causality violations and implement corrective measures that prevent timeline collapse while maintaining the integrity of cause and effect relationships throughout all historical periods. Your examination of the paradox detection algorithms reveals monitoring systems that track temporal energy flows and identify mathematical inconsistencies that could indicate developing paradox scenarios. The detection capabilities operate beyond contemporary understanding of temporal mathematics and causality physics by providing real-time analysis of multidimensional temporal relationships. The causality protection protocols include automated systems that prevent temporal travelers from creating grandfather paradox scenarios, information paradoxes, and other causality violations that could destabilize timeline integrity. The protection systems demonstrate understanding of temporal mechanics that exceeds contemporary theoretical physics by providing practical solutions to paradox prevention. The timeline stabilization technologies maintain temporal coherence during interventions by implementing mathematical corrections that preserve causality relationships while allowing controlled historical changes. The stabilization systems achieve temporal manipulation precision that contemporary physics considers theoretically impossible, but practically necessary for safe temporal operations. Your investigation of the paradox resolution systems reveals technologies that can repair timeline damage and restore causality coherence if temporal interventions accidentally create paradox scenarios. The resolution capabilities provide fail-safe mechanisms that protect timeline integrity and prevent permanent temporal damage from intervention mistakes. The temporal isolation protocols prevent paradox formation by limiting temporal travelers' interactions with their own past or future selves and preventing access to historical events that could create causality loops. The isolation systems demonstrate sophisticated understanding of temporal self-interaction hazards and prevention techniques. The information management systems control what knowledge temporal travelers can access about future events to prevent information paradoxes that could destabilize historical development. The information controls balance operational effectiveness with paradox prevention by providing necessary mission information while preventing dangerous temporal knowledge. Your examination of the causality mathematics reveals that paradox prevention operates according to dimensional physics principles that treat time as navigable space with specific rules governing interaction between different temporal locations. The mathematical framework exceeds contemporary physics by providing practical solutions for temporal navigation without causality violation. The paradox prevention includes psychological protocols that help temporal personnel maintain mental stability while possessing knowledge about future events without creating behavioral paradoxes. The psychological measures prevent temporal travelers from unconsciously influencing events through future knowledge while maintaining operational effectiveness. The temporal quarantine systems isolate individuals or objects that have been contaminated by paradox exposure to prevent temporal instability from spreading throughout the timeline. The quarantine capabilities provide emergency containment for temporal accidents while protecting overall timeline integrity from localized temporal damage. Your investigation reveals that paradox prevention includes monitoring systems that track the psychological and physical effects of temporal travel on personnel to identify early warning signs of temporal displacement syndrome or paradox formation. The monitoring provides medical and psychological support for temporal operations personnel. The paradox prevention records document instances where temporal interventions accidentally created causality violations and the corrective measures that were implemented to restore timeline stability. The incident records demonstrate both the risks of temporal manipulation and the effectiveness of paradox prevention systems. The temporal safety protocols include training programs that educate temporal personnel about paradox risks and prevention techniques, while providing practical guidelines for conducting temporal missions without compromising timeline integrity. The safety training ensures that temporal operations maintain causality, coherence throughout mission execution. The most remarkable aspect of paradox prevention systems is their ability to maintain timeline stability while allowing extensive temporal manipulation throughout history. The prevention capabilities demonstrate mathematical and technological solutions to paradox scenarios that contemporary physics identifies as theoretical problems but cannot solve practically. Your examination of current paradox prevention operations reveals ongoing monitoring of contemporary temporal activities to prevent accidental paradox formation during current missions. The current monitoring suggests that temporal operations continue to require sophisticated paradox prevention despite extensive experience and advanced prevention technologies. The paradox prevention systems include contingency planning for catastrophic paradox scenarios, including timeline collapse and reality breakdown situations. The contingency plans demonstrate understanding of extreme temporal threats and preparation for temporal emergencies that could threaten the existence of civilization itself. As you study the paradox prevention systems and temporal safety protocols, you begin to understand that temporal manipulation requires mathematical precision and technological sophistication that exceeds contemporary scientific capabilities while addressing theoretical problems that contemporary physics cannot solve. The realization that paradox prevention systems successfully maintain timeline stability while allowing extensive temporal manipulation makes you recognize that temporal technology represents practical engineering solutions to problems that contemporary physics identifies but cannot address through theoretical understanding alone. The artifact storage and analysis facilities in the temporal chamber contain objects, documents, and materials that have been collected from throughout history through temporal missions, representing physical evidence of historical events that contradicts official historical records, surface archaeological understanding of ancient civilizations and their capabilities. Your examination of the temporal artifact collection reveals objects that demonstrate advanced technologies existing in historical periods when surface archaeology claims such technologies didn't exist. The artifacts include mechanical devices, electronic components, and materials that represent technological capabilities that exceed surface understanding of historical technological development. The document archives contain written materials from throughout history, including government records, personal correspondence, and technical manuals that provide accurate information about historical events while contradicting surface historical narratives. The documents demonstrate that surface historical understanding represents incomplete or deliberately falsified information about actual historical development. The temporal preservation systems maintain artifacts in perfect condition, regardless of their age or original preservation state, using technologies that prevent decay, corrosion, and deterioration while preserving original materials and preventing contamination. The preservation capabilities exceed contemporary conservation technology by providing perfect artifact maintenance indefinitely. Your investigation of the artifact analysis systems reveals technologies that can determine the complete history of objects, including their creation, use, and temporal manipulation exposure. The analysis capabilities provide comprehensive understanding of artifact significance while identifying temporal contamination and intervention evidence. The artifact collection includes objects that were supposedly lost or destroyed in historical disasters, but were actually rescued through temporal missions conducted to preserve important historical materials and prevent cultural losses. The rescue operations demonstrate temporal commitment to preserving human cultural heritage while maintaining historical narrative accuracy. The temporal tracking systems monitor artifacts for signs of temporal instability or paradox contamination that could threaten timeline integrity. The tracking capabilities ensure that temporal artifacts don't compromise temporal security while providing early warning of temporal problems that require corrective action. Your examination of the scientific instrument collection reveals advanced measurement and analysis devices from throughout history that demonstrate scientific capabilities exceeding surface understanding of historical scientific development. The instruments indicate that surface scientific history represents limited understanding of actual historical scientific achievement. The artistic artifact collection includes works that demonstrate artistic techniques and cultural sophistication that exceeds surface understanding of historical artistic capabilities. The artworks indicate that historical cultures possessed aesthetic and technical abilities that surface archaeology has underestimated or ignored. The technological artifact collection contains devices and machines that demonstrate engineering capabilities existing in historical periods when surface technology history claims such engineering was impossible. The technological artifacts indicate systematic suppression of information about historical technological advancement. Your investigation reveals that temporal artifacts include objects from future time periods that were acquired through temporal missions to future historical periods. The future artifacts demonstrate that temporal travel operates in both historical directions while providing information about future technological and social development. The artifact security systems protect temporal collections from unauthorized access while preventing temporal contamination that could compromise artifact integrity or timeline stability. The security measures include temporal shielding, access controls, and elimination protocols for security threats to temporal artifact preservation. The artifact research programs use temporal collections to understand historical development, identify intervention opportunities, and plan future temporal missions. The research capabilities provide comprehensive historical analysis that guides temporal strategic planning while maintaining operational security and timeline integrity. The most remarkable aspect of temporal artifacts is evidence that historical civilizations possessed advanced technologies that were deliberately suppressed or hidden from surface historical records. The artifacts demonstrate systematic efforts to conceal historical technological capabilities while maintaining primitive historical narratives. Your examination of current artifact operations reveals ongoing collection missions that are acquiring contemporary objects and documents for temporal archive purposes. The current collection suggests that temporal facilities are systematically documenting contemporary civilization while preparing for future temporal missions. The artifact collections include materials that document temporal mission activities throughout history, providing evidence of temporal intervention operations while maintaining records of temporal strategic objectives and operational methods. The documentation provides comprehensive understanding of temporal influence on historical development. As you study the temporal artifact collections and preservation systems, you begin to understand that surface archaeological and historical understanding represents severely limited or deliberately falsified information. about actual historical development and technological capabilities throughout human civilization. The realization that temporal artifacts demonstrate advanced historical technologies while contradicting surface historical understanding makes you recognize that contemporary knowledge about historical development may represent systematic suppression of information about actual human technological and cultural achievement throughout history. The temporal surveillance systems in the facility operate as comprehensive monitoring networks that observe all historical periods simultaneously while tracking temporal manipulations, identifying security threats, and coordinating temporal operations across all time periods without being detected by surface populations or contemporary monitoring technologies. Your examination of the temporal observation systems reveals monitoring capabilities that provide real-time surveillance of any historical period or geographical location through temporal viewing technologies that exceed contemporary surveillance capabilities. The observation systems allow comprehensive monitoring without physical presence or detection risk while maintaining operational security. The surveillance coordination networks connect temporal monitoring stations throughout different time periods while sharing information and coordinating security responses across all historical periods. The coordination capabilities allow global temporal security operations while maintaining communication security and preventing surface detection of temporal surveillance activities. The threat detection algorithms analyze surveillance data to identify individuals, organizations, or events that could threaten temporal security or timeline stability. The detection systems provide early warning of potential problems while coordinating appropriate responses that prevent security breaches without compromising temporal operations. Your investigation of the personnel monitoring systems reveals comprehensive surveillance of temporal operations personnel to ensure loyalty, prevent security breaches, and identify psychological problems that could compromise operational effectiveness. The personnel surveillance includes behavioral analysis, communication monitoring, and psychological evaluation systems. The surface infiltration monitoring tracks temporal personnel operating in surface civilization while ensuring their cover identities remain secure and their activities serve temporal strategic objectives. The infiltration monitoring provides security oversight for temporal operations while preventing surface detection of temporal personnel activities. The historical surveillance records document continuous monitoring of surface civilization development throughout history while tracking the effectiveness of temporal interventions and identifying opportunities for future temporal missions. The historical records provide comprehensive understanding of surface civilization development under temporal influence. Your examination of the communication surveillance systems reveals monitoring of surface communication networks to identify potential security threats and gather intelligence about surface activities that could affect temporal operations. The communication monitoring operates without detection while providing comprehensive intelligence about surface civilization activities. The technological surveillance monitors surface technological development to identify advances that could threaten temporal security or create opportunities for temporal assistance. The technology monitoring ensures that surface technological development follows directions that serve temporal strategic objectives while preventing dangerous technological developments. The temporal security protocols include elimination procedures for individuals who pose threats to temporal operations or timeline stability. The elimination capabilities provide final security measures while maintaining operational security and preventing surface detection of temporal security activities. Your investigation reveals that temporal surveillance includes monitoring of contemporary events while tracking current temporal operations and identifying ongoing security threats. The current surveillance suggests comprehensive monitoring of modern civilization while coordinating current temporal intervention activities. The surveillance analysis systems process monitoring data to identify patterns, trends, and opportunities that guide temporal strategic planning and operational decisions. The analysis capabilities provide intelligent support for temporal operations while maintaining security and preventing surface detection of temporal intelligence activities. The temporal counterintelligence systems protect temporal operations from surface intelligence services while preventing surface organizations from discovering temporal activities. The counterintelligence capabilities include disinformation operations, security penetration, and elimination procedures for intelligence threats. The most disturbing aspect of temporal surveillance is evidence that surface populations have been under continuous observation throughout history, while temporal operations have been influencing surface development according to temporal strategic objectives rather than surface political processes. Your examination of current surveillance operations reveals ongoing monitoring of contemporary political leaders, military officials, and intelligence organizations while tracking their activities and influencing their decisions through temporal manipulation. The current surveillance suggests that modern global leadership operates under temporal influence rather than independent political authority. The surveillance records document systematic monitoring of surface resistance movements and elimination of individuals who pose threats to temporal security. The resistance monitoring indicates that temporal security includes active suppression of surface opposition while maintaining secrecy about temporal operations and influence. As you study the temporal surveillance systems and security operations, you begin to understand that surface civilization operates under comprehensive temporal monitoring and control, while surface populations remain unaware of temporal surveillance and manipulation of their political and social development. The realization that temporal surveillance provides comprehensive monitoring and control of surface civilization makes you recognize that contemporary political independence and social autonomy may represent illusions maintained through temporal manipulation, while actual control operates through temporal surveillance and intervention systems. The reality anchor systems in the temporal facility operate as dimensional stabilization technologies that maintain the structural integrity of space-time during temporal manipulations, while preventing reality collapse, scenarios that could result from excessive temporal intervention or paradox formation that threatens the fundamental fabric of existence itself. Your examination of the dimensional stabilization networks reveals that reality anchors function as fixed points in space-time that maintain timeline stability during temporal manipulations by providing mathematical reference points that preserve causality relationships. The anchor systems demonstrate understanding of dimensional physics that exceeds contemporary theoretical understanding by providing practical solutions for reality maintenance. The stability monitoring systems track dimensional stress levels throughout the timeline, while identifying areas where temporal interventions have created instability that could threaten reality integrity. The monitoring capabilities provide early warning of reality threats, while coordinating stabilization responses that prevent dimensional collapse scenarios. The reality maintenance protocols include automated systems that implement corrective measures when dimensional stress exceeds safe parameters during temporal operations. The maintenance systems demonstrate sophisticated understanding of reality mechanics by providing real-time stability adjustments that maintain existence integrity during complex temporal manipulations. Your investigation of the anchor deployment systems reveals that reality anchors are positioned at critical historical nexus points throughout the timeline, where major events create dimensional stress that requires stabilization. The anchor placement demonstrates strategic understanding of temporal mechanics while providing comprehensive reality protection throughout all historical periods. The dimensional repair technologies can restore reality integrity if temporal manipulations accidentally create reality damage or dimensional instability. The repair capabilities provide emergency response for reality threats while preventing permanent damage to the fundamental structure of existence that could threaten all life and civilization. The reality anchor coordination systems manage multiple stabilization points throughout the timeline while ensuring that anchor operations support overall reality stability. without creating conflicts between different stabilization efforts. The coordination demonstrates systematic reality management that operates beyond individual temporal interventions. Your examination of the reality mathematics reveals that dimensional stability operates according to multi-dimensional physics principles that treat reality as an engineered system requiring active maintenance and protection. The mathematical framework exceeds contemporary physics by providing practical solutions for reality engineering rather than just theoretical understanding. The stability assessment systems evaluate the reality impact of proposed temporal interventions before they are implemented, ensuring that temporal missions maintain dimensional stability while achieving operational objectives. The assessment capabilities prevent reality threats through comprehensive impact analysis that exceeds contemporary understanding of dimensional consequences. The reality anchor maintenance includes regular inspections and adjustments that ensure continued anchor effectiveness while adapting to changing dimensional conditions throughout the timeline. The maintenance protocols demonstrate ongoing reality management that requires continuous attention rather than passive stability systems. Your investigation reveals that reality anchors include emergency protocols for catastrophic reality scenarios, including dimensional collapse and existence failure situations. The emergency procedures demonstrate preparation for ultimate reality threats, while providing last resort measures that could preserve some form of existence during total reality breakdown. The anchor security systems protect reality stabilization technologies from interference or sabotage that could compromise dimensional stability. The security measures include access controls, automated defenses, and elimination protocols for threats to reality anchor operations that could endanger fundamental existence integrity. The reality monitoring records document instances where temporal interventions created dimensional instability and the corrective measures that were implemented to restore reality integrity. The incident records demonstrate both the risks of temporal manipulation and the effectiveness of reality protection systems. The most terrifying aspect of reality anchor systems is evidence that existence itself requires active technological maintenance to prevent collapse scenarios that could eliminate all life, matter, and energy throughout the universe. The anchor systems reveal that reality stability cannot be assumed, but must be actively maintained through technological intervention. Your examination of current reality anchor operations reveals ongoing dimensional maintenance activities that are preventing contemporary reality threats while maintaining existence stability during current temporal interventions. The current operations suggest that modern reality requires continuous technological support to maintain basic existence integrity. The reality anchor systems include long-term strategic planning for dimensional stability maintenance over cosmic timescales that extend far beyond human civilization timelines. The cosmic planning demonstrates reality management that operates according to universal rather than merely planetary or human considerations. As you study the reality anchor systems and dimensional maintenance protocols, you begin to understand that existence itself operates as a technological system requiring active maintenance rather than a natural phenomenon that maintains itself through physical laws and natural processes. The realization that reality anchor systems maintain the fundamental integrity of existence makes you recognize that reality itself may represent engineered rather than natural phenomenon, with stability that depends on technological intervention rather than inherent universal stability. The temporal weapons systems in the facility represent military applications of temporal technology that allow strategic attacks through time manipulation, historical intervention, and causality disruption that exceed conventional military capabilities by targeting enemies across temporal dimensions while maintaining operational security through timeline manipulation. Your examination of the temporal warfare protocols reveals weapons systems that can eliminate enemies by preventing their birth, disrupting their historical development, or removing their ancestors from the timeline. The temporal assassination capabilities provide ultimate military solutions while maintaining plausible historical narratives that conceal temporal warfare operations. The historical disruption weapons can destroy civilizations by manipulating their technological development, preventing crucial historical events, or introducing devastating information that causes social collapse. The civilization destruction capabilities demonstrate temporal warfare that operates through historical manipulation rather than direct military confrontation. The causality disruption systems can destroy enemy capabilities by preventing the historical events that led to their development while maintaining timeline stability through carefully calculated temporal interventions. The causality weapons provide precise military targeting through temporal manipulation rather than conventional destruction. Your investigation of the temporal defense systems reveals protection technologies that can shield targets from temporal attacks by creating temporal barriers, timeline isolation, and causality protection. The defense capabilities provide security against temporal warfare while maintaining operational effectiveness during temporal conflicts. The temporal battlefield monitoring systems track temporal warfare operations across all historical periods while coordinating military responses and assessing battle effectiveness. The monitoring capabilities provide comprehensive situational awareness for temporal conflicts that operate across multiple time periods simultaneously. The temporal military training programs prepare personnel for temporal warfare operations, including historical combat, timeline navigation, and causality manipulation techniques. The training systems demonstrate military expertise that exceeds conventional warfare by requiring temporal combat capabilities and historical intervention skills. Your examination of the temporal weapons storage reveals arsenal systems that contain temporal military technologies, including personal temporal weapons, strategic temporal systems, and defensive temporal technologies. The weapons storage demonstrates military preparedness for temporal conflicts while maintaining security and preventing unauthorized access to temporal weapons. The temporal warfare records document historical conflicts that were conducted through temporal manipulation rather than conventional military operations. The warfare records reveal military campaigns that influenced historical development while maintaining secrecy about temporal military intervention in historical conflicts. The tactical temporal systems include battlefield applications that provide temporal advantages during conventional conflicts through time manipulation, future intelligence, and historical intervention. The tactical capabilities demonstrate military integration of temporal technology with conventional warfare systems. Your investigation reveals that temporal weapons include strategic systems that can destroy entire civilizations through timeline manipulation without conventional military action. The strategic capabilities provide ultimate military power while maintaining operational security through temporal manipulation rather than obvious military destruction. The temporal weapons coordination systems manage military operations across multiple time periods while ensuring that temporal warfare supports consistent strategic objectives without creating conflicts between different temporal military operations. The coordination demonstrates sophisticated temporal military planning and operational management. The temporal military intelligence systems provide comprehensive information about enemy capabilities, intentions, and activities across all historical periods. The intelligence capabilities include historical surveillance, future reconnaissance, and temporal counterintelligence that exceed conventional military intelligence through temporal information gathering. The most disturbing aspect of temporal weapons is evidence that historical wars and conflicts were influenced or controlled through temporal military intervention, while surface populations believed they were experiencing natural military conflicts. The temporal warfare records suggest systematic military manipulation of historical development. Your examination of current temporal weapons operations reveals ongoing military activities that are influencing contemporary conflicts while maintaining secrecy about temporal military intervention in current international relations. The current operations suggest that modern warfare includes temporal military components, while surface military forces operate without knowledge of temporal warfare influence. The temporal weapons systems include contingency planning for temporal warfare scenarios, including temporal invasion, timeline conquest, and reality warfare that could threaten the fundamental existence of civilization itself. The contingency plans demonstrate military preparation for ultimate temporal threats. As you study the temporal weapons systems and military operations, you begin to understand that military conflict includes temporal dimensions that exceed conventional military understanding, while providing capabilities that fundamentally alter the nature of warfare and strategic competition. The realization that temporal weapons provide military capabilities that exceed conventional military power makes you recognize that contemporary military conflicts may represent limited understanding of actual military capabilities, while temporal military operations influence global security through historical manipulation. The temporal medical systems in the facility represent healthcare applications of temporal technology that allow medical intervention through time, manipulation, historical health modification, and causality. Healing that exceed conventional medical capabilities by treating diseases and injuries across temporal dimensions while maintaining patient health through timeline intervention. Your examination of the temporal healing protocols reveals medical systems that can treat diseases by preventing their historical causes, eliminating genetic predispositions, or removing environmental factors that contribute to illness development. The temporal medical capabilities provide ultimate healthcare solutions while maintaining patient health through timeline manipulation rather than conventional medical treatment. The historical health intervention systems can improve patient outcomes by modifying past medical decisions, providing retroactive medical knowledge, or preventing historical injuries and illnesses. The historical medical capabilities demonstrate healthcare that operates through temporal manipulation rather than contemporary medical intervention. The genetic timeline modification systems can correct genetic disorders by altering ancestral genetic development while maintaining family history integrity through carefully calculated temporal interventions. The genetic modification capabilities provide medical solutions that exceed contemporary genetic medicine through temporal genetic engineering. Your investigation of the temporal surgical systems reveals medical technologies that can perform surgery across temporal dimensions by operating in past time periods when surgical intervention would be most effective. The temporal surgery capabilities provide medical precision that exceeds conventional surgical technology through temporal medical access. The temporal pharmaceutical systems can deliver medications through timeline manipulation by ensuring that patients receive optimal medical treatment during historical periods when such treatment would be most effective. The temporal medication capabilities provide medical dosing precision that exceeds contemporary pharmacology through temporal medical delivery. The temporal diagnostic systems can identify medical conditions by analyzing patient health across entire life timelines while providing comprehensive medical assessment that includes historical health factors and future health development. The diagnostic capabilities provide medical analysis that exceeds contemporary medical assessment through temporal health evaluation. Your examination of the temporal medical records reveals healthcare interventions that have prevented historical medical disasters, guided medical research development, and improved global health outcomes through temporal medical intervention. The medical records demonstrate systematic temporal healthcare that influences global health development. The temporal medical training programs prepare healthcare personnel for temporal medical operations, including historical medical intervention, timeline, health navigation, and causality healing techniques. The training systems demonstrate medical expertise that exceeds conventional healthcare by requiring temporal medical capabilities and historical intervention skills. The temporal medical research systems can accelerate medical development by providing future medical knowledge, testing medical treatments across historical periods, and conducting medical research that operates beyond conventional time limitations. The research capabilities provide medical advancement that exceeds contemporary medical research through temporal medical investigation. Your investigation reveals that temporal medicine includes preventive health care that can eliminate diseases before they develop by modifying historical health factors and environmental conditions. The preventive capabilities provide medical prevention that exceeds contemporary public health through temporal health intervention. The temporal medical ethics systems address moral and ethical considerations involved in temporal health care while ensuring that temporal medical intervention maintains patient welfare and medical integrity. The ethics protocols demonstrate medical responsibility that exceeds conventional medical ethics through temporal healthcare considerations. The temporal medical coordination systems manage healthcare operations across multiple time periods while ensuring that temporal medical intervention supports consistent health objectives without creating conflicts between different temporal medical operations. The coordination demonstrates sophisticated temporal medical planning and operational management. The most remarkable aspect of temporal medicine is evidence that historical medical advances were accelerated through temporal medical intervention, while surface medical populations believed they were experiencing natural medical progress. The temporal medical records suggest systematic medical manipulation of healthcare development. Your examination of current temporal medical operations reveals ongoing healthcare activities that are improving contemporary medical outcomes while maintaining secrecy about temporal medical intervention in current healthcare systems. The current operations suggest that modern medicine includes temporal medical components, while surface medical professionals operate without knowledge of temporal medical influence. The temporal medical systems include life extension technologies that can extend patient lifespans through temporal health manipulation while maintaining natural aging appearances. The life extension capabilities provide medical longevity that exceeds contemporary medical technology through temporal health maintenance. As you study the temporal medical systems and healthcare operations, you begin to understand that healthcare includes temporal dimensions that exceed conventional medical understanding while providing capabilities that fundamentally alter the nature of medicine and health maintenance. The realization that temporal medicine provides healthcare capabilities that exceed conventional medical power makes you recognize that contemporary medical outcomes may represent limited understanding of actual medical capabilities, while temporal medical operations influence global health through historical manipulation. The temporal education systems in the facility represent learning applications of temporal technology that allow educational intervention through time manipulation, historical knowledge acquisition, and causality, learning that exceed conventional educational capabilities by providing education across temporal dimensions, while maintaining student development through timeline educational enhancement. Your examination of the temporal learning protocols reveals educational systems that can provide students with direct historical experience, future knowledge access, and comprehensive temporal perspective that exceeds conventional educational limitations. The temporal educational capabilities provide ultimate learning solutions while maintaining student development through timeline educational intervention rather than conventional classroom instruction. The historical experience programs allow students to witness historical events directly while gaining first-hand understanding of historical development that exceeds conventional historical education. The historical educational capabilities demonstrate learning that operates through temporal experience rather than contemporary educational materials and textbook instruction. The future knowledge access systems can provide students with information about future technological and social development while maintaining educational integrity through carefully managed temporal educational exposure. The future educational capabilities provide learning advancement that exceeds contemporary educational technology through temporal knowledge acquisition. Your investigation of the temporal skill development systems reveals educational technologies that can accelerate learning by providing temporal practice opportunities and historical expertise access. The temporal skill capabilities provide educational development that exceeds conventional training through temporal skill acquisition and historical mentorship programs. The temporal language learning systems can provide students with native fluency in any historical language through temporal immersion experiences that exceed conventional language education. The language capabilities provide linguistic development that exceeds contemporary language learning through temporal cultural immersion and historical language exposure. The temporal research education systems can provide students with access to historical archives, future developments, and comprehensive temporal research capabilities that exceed conventional academic research limitations. The research capabilities provide educational investigation that exceeds contemporary academic research through temporal information access. Your examination of the temporal educational records reveals learning interventions that have accelerated educational development, guided academic research, and improved global knowledge outcomes through temporal educational intervention. The educational records demonstrate systematic temporal learning that influences global educational development. The temporal educational training programs prepare education personnel for temporal learning operations, including historical educational intervention, timeline knowledge navigation, and causality learning techniques. The training systems demonstrate educational expertise that exceeds conventional teaching by requiring temporal educational capabilities and historical intervention skills. The temporal educational assessment systems can evaluate student learning across entire educational timelines, while providing comprehensive academic assessment that includes historical learning factors and future educational development. The assessment capabilities provide educational evaluation that exceeds contemporary academic assessment through temporal learning analysis. Your investigation reveals that temporal education includes accelerated learning that can provide students with advanced knowledge and skills through temporal educational enhancement that exceeds conventional educational timeframes. The accelerated capabilities provide educational development that exceeds contemporary academic programs through temporal learning acceleration. The temporal educational ethics systems address moral and ethical considerations involved in temporal learning while ensuring that temporal educational intervention maintains student welfare and educational integrity. The ethics protocols demonstrate educational responsibility that exceeds conventional academic ethics through temporal educational considerations. The temporal educational coordination systems manage learning operations across multiple time periods while ensuring that temporal educational intervention supports consistent learning objectives without creating conflicts between different temporal educational operations. The coordination demonstrates sophisticated temporal educational planning and operational management. The most remarkable aspect of temporal education is evidence that historical educational advances were accelerated through temporal educational intervention, while surface educational populations believed they were experiencing natural academic progress. The temporal educational records suggest systematic learning manipulation of educational development. Your examination of current temporal educational operations reveals ongoing learning activities that are improving contemporary educational outcomes while maintaining secrecy about temporal educational intervention in current academic systems. The current operations suggest that modern education includes temporal learning components, while surface educational professionals operate without knowledge of temporal educational influence. The temporal educational systems include cognitive enhancement technologies that can improve student intellectual capabilities through temporal mental development while maintaining natural learning appearances. The cognitive enhancement capabilities provide educational intelligence that exceeds contemporary educational technologies through temporal mental enhancement. As you study the temporal educational systems and learning operations, you begin to understand that education includes temporal dimensions that exceed conventional academic understanding, while providing capabilities that fundamentally alter the nature of learning and knowledge acquisition. The realization that temporal education provides learning capabilities that exceed conventional educational power makes you recognize that contemporary academic outcomes may represent limited understanding of actual educational capabilities, while temporal educational operations influence global knowledge through historical manipulation. The temporal economic systems in the facility represent financial applications of temporal technology that allow economic intervention through time manipulation, historical wealth creation, and causality, commerce that exceed conventional economic capabilities by conducting business across temporal dimensions while maintaining financial prosperity through timeline economic enhancement. Your examination of the temporal trading protocols reveals economic systems that can manipulate financial markets through historical intervention, future market knowledge, and temporal arbitrage opportunities that exceed conventional financial limitations. The temporal economic capabilities provide ultimate financial solutions while maintaining economic prosperity through timeline financial intervention rather than conventional market participation. The historical wealth creation systems can establish financial resources by implementing historical investment strategies, preventing historical financial losses, and creating historical business opportunities. The historical economic capabilities demonstrate commerce that operates through temporal financial manipulation rather than contemporary business development. The future market knowledge systems can provide traders with information about future economic development while maintaining market integrity through carefully managed temporal financial exposure. The future economic capabilities provide financial advancement that exceeds contemporary economic technology through temporal market information. Your investigation of the temporal investment systems reveals financial technologies that can optimize investment returns by operating across multiple time periods while providing temporal diversification that exceeds conventional investment strategies. The temporal investment capabilities provide financial development that exceeds conventional finance through temporal portfolio management. The temporal currency systems can manipulate monetary values through timeline intervention while maintaining economic stability through carefully calculated temporal financial operations. The currency capabilities provide financial control that exceeds contemporary monetary policy through temporal economic manipulation. The temporal business development systems can create commercial enterprises by establishing historical business foundations and ensuring future business success through temporal commercial intervention. The business capabilities provide economic development that exceeds conventional entrepreneurship through temporal business creation. Your examination of the temporal economic records reveals financial interventions that have prevented economic disasters, guided financial development, and improved global economic outcomes through temporal economic intervention. The economic records demonstrate systematic temporal commerce that influences global economic development. The temporal economic training programs prepare financial personnel for temporal economic operations, including historical financial intervention, timeline commerce navigation, and causality trading techniques. The training systems demonstrate economic expertise that exceeds conventional finance by requiring temporal economic capabilities and historical intervention skills. The temporal economic analysis systems can evaluate market conditions across entire economic timelines while providing comprehensive financial assessment that includes historical economic factors and future economic development. The analysis capabilities provide economic evaluation that exceeds contemporary financial analysis through temporal economic assessment. Your investigation reveals that temporal economics includes wealth preservation that can protect financial resources through temporal economic diversification, while maintaining financial security across all historical periods. The preservation capabilities provide economic protection that exceeds contemporary financial security through temporal wealth management. The temporal economic ethics systems address moral and ethical considerations involved in temporal commerce, while ensuring that temporal economic intervention maintains financial integrity and economic justice. The ethics protocols demonstrate economic responsibility that exceeds conventional business ethics through temporal economic considerations. The temporal economic coordination systems manage commercial operations across multiple time periods, while ensuring that temporal economic intervention supports consistent financial objectives without creating conflicts between different temporal economic operations. The coordination demonstrates sophisticated temporal economic planning and operational management. The most disturbing aspect of temporal economics is evidence that historical economic development was controlled through temporal financial intervention, while surface economic populations believed they were experiencing natural market forces. The temporal economic record suggests systematic financial manipulation of economic development. Your examination of current temporal economic operations reveals ongoing commercial activities that are influencing contemporary financial markets, while maintaining secrecy about temporal economic intervention in current business systems. The current operations suggest that modern economics includes temporal financial components, while surface financial professionals operate without knowledge of temporal economic influence. The temporal economic systems include resource generation technologies that can create unlimited wealth through temporal economic manipulation, while maintaining natural market appearances. The resource generation capabilities provide economic abundance that exceeds contemporary financial technology through temporal wealth creation. As you study the temporal economic systems and commercial operations, you begin to understand that economics includes temporal dimensions that exceed conventional financial understanding, while providing capabilities that fundamentally alter the nature of commerce and wealth creation. The realization that temporal economics provides financial capabilities that exceed conventional economic power makes you recognize that contemporary market outcomes may represent limited understanding of actual economic capabilities, while temporal economic operations influence global finance through historical manipulation. The temporal resistance monitoring systems in the facility reveal that opposition to temporal operations exists throughout history, with resistance movements that work to expose temporal manipulation, prevent temporal intervention, and restore natural historical development. Despite the overwhelming technological advantages possessed by temporal organizations and their comprehensive control systems, your examination of the resistance detection networks reveals surveillance systems that track individuals and organizations who pose threats to temporal operations, while identifying resistance activities that could compromise temporal security or expose temporal manipulation to surface populations. The detection capabilities provide comprehensive resistance monitoring while coordinating appropriate responses. The resistance suppression protocols include elimination procedures, memory modification techniques, and historical intervention strategies that neutralize opposition while maintaining operational security and preventing resistance movements from gaining effectiveness or public support. The suppression capabilities demonstrate systematic efforts to maintain temporal control. The counter-resistance operations include infiltration of resistance organizations, disinformation campaigns, and manipulation of resistance activities to serve temporal strategic objectives while preventing effective opposition to temporal operations. The counter-resistance demonstrates sophisticated intelligence operations that exceed conventional counterintelligence capabilities. Your investigation of the resistance historical records reveals that opposition to temporal operations has existed throughout history, with resistance movements that achieved varying degrees of success in exposing temporal manipulation and preventing temporal intervention. The historical resistance demonstrates persistent opposition despite overwhelming temporal advantages. The resistance capabilities assessment systems evaluate opposition strengths, weaknesses, and potential threats, while developing countermeasures that neutralize resistance effectiveness and prevent successful opposition to temporal operations. The assessment capabilities provide comprehensive resistance analysis while supporting suppression planning. The temporal resistance includes individuals who escaped temporal recruitment, rejected temporal cooperation, and dedicated their lives to exposing temporal operations, despite personal risks and limited resources. The resistance membership demonstrates exceptional courage and commitment to opposing temporal control. Your examination of the resistance intelligence reveals that opposition movements possess extensive knowledge about temporal operations, intervention techniques, and strategic objectives. Through careful investigation and intelligence gathering, the resistance intelligence demonstrates sophisticated understanding of temporal activities, despite limited resources and constant surveillance. The resistance operations include documentation efforts, exposure attempts, and sabotage activities that work to prevent temporal intervention and expose temporal manipulation to surface populations. The resistance activities demonstrate persistent efforts to restore natural historical development despite overwhelming temporal advantages. The resistance communication systems include secure networks, hidden meeting procedures, and information sharing protocols that maintain resistance coordination while avoiding temporal detection and suppression efforts. The communication capabilities demonstrate organizational sophistication that exceeds expected resistance capabilities. Your investigation reveals that temporal resistance includes surface institutions, government organizations, and academic groups that work to prevent temporal manipulation while maintaining official cover for resistance activities. The institutional resistance demonstrates systematic opposition within surface civilization structures. The resistance technology development includes efforts to create temporal detection systems, intervention prevention technologies, and timeline protection devices that could provide effective opposition to temporal operations. The technology development demonstrates resistance commitment to developing effective countermeasures. The resistance coordination systems manage opposition activities across multiple geographical locations and historical periods while maintaining operational security and preventing temporal suppression efforts. The coordination demonstrates sophisticated resistance organization that operates despite comprehensive temporal surveillance. The most remarkable aspect of temporal resistance is evidence that opposition movements have achieved limited success in preventing specific temporal interventions and exposing temporal manipulation to selected surface populations. The resistance achievements demonstrate that temporal control is not absolute, despite overwhelming technological advantages. Your examination of current resistance activities reveals ongoing opposition to temporal operations that are working to expose contemporary temporal manipulation while building resistance capabilities for future opposition efforts. The current resistance suggests persistent opposition despite comprehensive temporal control systems. The resistance strategic planning includes long-term objectives for exposing temporal operations, preventing temporal intervention, and restoring surface civilization independence from temporal control. The strategic planning demonstrates resistance commitment to ultimate victory despite overwhelming odds and limited resources. As you study the temporal resistance systems and opposition activities, you begin to understand that temporal control faces persistent opposition from individuals and organizations who value freedom and natural development over security and technological advancement provided through temporal manipulation. The realization that temporal resistance maintains persistent opposition despite overwhelming temporal advantages makes you recognize that the conflict between temporal control and surface freedom represents fundamental human values that cannot be eliminated through technological superiority or comprehensive surveillance systems. The temporal consciousness systems in the facility represent the most advanced applications of temporal technology that allow direct manipulation of human awareness, memory, and perception across temporal dimensions while maintaining psychological integrity. Through carefully managed consciousness intervention, that exceeds conventional understanding of human mental capabilities. Your examination of the consciousness manipulation protocols reveals technologies that can modify human memories, alter psychological development, and influence decision-making processes through temporal intervention in neural development. The consciousness capabilities provide ultimate psychological control while maintaining mental stability through timeline consciousness manipulation rather than conventional psychological techniques. The memory modification systems can alter personal histories by changing remembered experiences, eliminating traumatic memories, and implanting beneficial memories that improve psychological health and social functioning. The memory capabilities demonstrate consciousness control that operates through temporal memory manipulation rather than contemporary psychological treatment. The awareness enhancement systems can expand human consciousness by providing temporal perspective, historical knowledge access, and multidimensional awareness that exceeds conventional human psychological limitations. The awareness capabilities provide consciousness development that exceeds contemporary psychology through temporal mental enhancement. Your investigation of the temporal psychological development systems reveals consciousness technologies that can optimize personality formation, accelerate emotional maturity, and enhance cognitive capabilities through temporal intervention in psychological development. The psychological capabilities provide mental development that exceeds conventional psychology through temporal consciousness enhancement. The temporal empathy systems can provide individuals with direct emotional experience of historical events and future possibilities while maintaining psychological stability through carefully managed temporal emotional exposure. The empathy capabilities provide emotional development that exceeds contemporary psychology through temporal emotional experience. The collective consciousness systems can create shared awareness between individuals across temporal dimensions while maintaining individual psychological integrity through carefully managed temporal consciousness integration. The collective capabilities provide social consciousness that exceeds contemporary psychology through temporal awareness sharing. Your examination of the temporal consciousness records reveals psychological interventions that have improved human mental health, guided psychological development, and enhanced global consciousness outcomes through temporal consciousness intervention. The consciousness records demonstrate systematic temporal psychology that influences global mental development. The temporal consciousness training programs prepare psychology personnel for temporal consciousness operations, including historical psychological intervention, timeline awareness, navigation, and causality consciousness techniques. The training systems demonstrate psychological expertise that exceeds conventional psychology by requiring temporal consciousness capabilities and historical intervention skills. The temporal consciousness assessment systems can evaluate mental conditions across entire psychological timelines while providing comprehensive mental assessment that includes historical psychological factors and future psychological development. The assessment capabilities provide psychological evaluation that exceeds contemporary mental health assessment through temporal consciousness analysis. Your investigation reveals that temporal consciousness includes mental healing that can resolve psychological problems by addressing their historical causes and preventing psychological damage through temporal psychological intervention. The healing capabilities provide mental health that exceeds contemporary psychology through temporal psychological treatment. The temporal consciousness ethics systems address moral and ethical considerations involved in temporal psychology while ensuring that temporal consciousness intervention maintains mental welfare and psychological integrity. The ethics protocols demonstrate psychological responsibility that exceeds conventional mental health ethics through temporal consciousness considerations. The temporal consciousness coordination systems manage psychological operations across multiple time periods, while ensuring that temporal consciousness intervention supports consistent mental health objectives without creating conflicts between different temporal psychological operations. The coordination demonstrates sophisticated temporal psychological planning and operational management. The most disturbing aspect of temporal consciousness is evidence that human psychological development has been systematically manipulated through temporal consciousness intervention. While surface populations believed they were experiencing natural psychological growth, the temporal consciousness records suggest comprehensive mental manipulation of human development. Your examination of current temporal consciousness operations reveals ongoing psychological activities that are influencing contemporary mental health while maintaining secrecy about temporal consciousness intervention in current psychological systems. The current operations suggest that modern psychology includes temporal consciousness components, while surface mental health professionals operate without knowledge of temporal psychological influence. The temporal consciousness systems include identity modification technologies that can alter fundamental personality characteristics through temporal psychological manipulation while maintaining natural psychological appearances. The identity modification capabilities provide psychological control that exceeds contemporary psychology through temporal personality engineering. As you study the temporal consciousness systems and psychological operations, you begin to understand that human psychology includes temporal dimensions that exceed conventional mental health understanding, while providing capabilities that fundamentally alter the nature of consciousness and mental development. The realization that temporal consciousness provides psychological capabilities that exceed conventional mental health power makes you recognize that contemporary psychological outcomes may represent limited understanding of actual consciousness capabilities, while temporal psychological operations influence global mental health through historical manipulation. Standing in the Temporal Control Center, with complete understanding of temporal technology and its implications for human civilization, you face the ultimate choice between supporting temporal operations that provide technological solutions while requiring acceptance of comprehensive control, or joining temporal resistance movements that preserve human freedom while accepting continued global problems and potential conflict. Your analysis of temporal operations reveals genuine benefits, including prevention of nuclear warfare, environmental disasters, and social catastrophes that could have eliminated human civilization without temporal intervention. The temporal achievements demonstrate technological and social capabilities that provide solutions to problems that surface civilization has not resolved independently. The temporal control systems offer global stability, technological advancement, and social prosperity, while requiring acceptance of external authority and abandonment of surface autonomy and self-determination. The temporal option provides security and progress while eliminating human freedom to make mistakes and learn through independent experience. Your examination of resistance alternatives reveals preservation of human agency and the right of surface populations to determine their own development, even if this results in greater immediate suffering and slower progress towards solving global problems. The resistance option maintains human dignity and self-determination while accepting risks and limitations. The complexity of your decision involves weighing immediate human welfare against long-term human development, technological advancement against freedom and autonomy, and global security against individual and collective self-determination. The choice reflects fundamental questions about human nature and the relationship between security and freedom. The temporal strategic objectives include long-term human survival and technological development that could benefit all humanity while requiring surrender of human independence and acceptance of external control over historical development. The temporal goals prioritize collective welfare over individual freedom and technological capability over human agency. Your understanding of resistance objectives reveals commitment to human freedom and self-determination that preserves human dignity while accepting greater risks and slower progress toward technological and social advancement. The resistance priorities emphasize human agency over security and freedom over technological capability. The consequences of supporting temporal operations include access to advanced technologies, participation in global management systems, and personal security, while requiring loyalty to temporal authority and abandonment of surface political and social loyalties. The temporal choice provides individual benefits while requiring surrender of human independence. Your assessment of resistance consequences reveals personal risks, including elimination, memory modification, or temporal displacement, while providing opportunities to preserve human freedom and restore natural historical development. The resistance choice prioritizes human values over personal security and collective freedom over individual benefit. The moral implications of your decision include responsibility for outcomes that could affect human civilization for generations, with consequences ranging from technological advancement under external control to continued human struggle for independent development. The choice represents fundamental questions about human values and priorities. Your access to temporal technology provides unique capabilities that could influence the outcome of the conflict between temporal control and human freedom, depending on how you choose to use temporal knowledge and access. The decision about using temporal capabilities will determine your role in shaping human civilization's future. The time pressure for decision-making reflects approaching temporal operations that will make resistance more difficult, while temporal control becomes more comprehensive. The timing considerations require immediate choice between cooperation and resistance, while opportunities for effective opposition diminish. Your influence possibilities include providing resistance with temporal intelligence, sabotaging temporal operations, or serving temporal objectives, while secretly supporting resistance activities. The influence options require careful consideration of risks, effectiveness, and moral implications for different approaches to serving human interests. The strategic considerations include assessment of which approach offers the best balance between human welfare and human freedom, while recognizing that any choice involves trade-offs and risks that could have significant consequences for human development and survival. As you weigh your options and their implications, you recognize that your individual choice represents broader human choices about values, priorities, and the direction of human civilization development. The decision reflects fundamental questions about what human civilization should become and how technological capability should relate to human freedom. Your final assessment involves determining which path serves the broader interests of human civilization while remaining true to your own values and moral principles. The choice requires balancing immediate consequences against long-term implications while considering both individual and collective human interests. The decision you make will determine your role in the ongoing conflict between temporal control and human freedom, while influencing how temporal technology is used to shape human civilization's future development. The choice represents both personal commitment and broader civilizational direction. Your decision to expose temporal operations initiates a cascade of revelations that fundamentally alters human understanding of history, technology, and civilization, while triggering global responses that range from disbelief and denial to acceptance and demands for temporal technology, access that threaten to destabilize both temporal operations and surface political systems. The initial disclosure of temporal technology, evidenced through secure communication networks and resistance organizations, creates immediate international incidents as governments demand access to temporal capabilities, while temporal authorities implement emergency suppression protocols to prevent complete exposure of temporal operations and maintain operational security. Your documentation of temporal facilities, technology, and operations provides unprecedented evidence of advanced technological capabilities that exceed contemporary scientific understanding, while demonstrating systematic historical manipulation that contradicts official historical narratives and challenges fundamental assumptions about human technological development. The global response to temporal revelations includes government investigations, scientific analysis, and public demonstrations that demand transparency about temporal operations, while temporal authorities coordinate international suppression efforts to prevent complete loss of operational secrecy and maintain strategic control over temporal technology. Your release of temporal mission records exposes specific historical interventions that prevented disasters, influenced political decisions, and guided technological development, while revealing that major historical events were systematically manipulated rather than occurring through natural historical processes and human decision-making. The scientific community response includes attempts to verify temporal technology, while temporal authorities provide selective information that maintains scientific interest without revealing complete temporal capabilities. The scientific engagement demonstrates the challenge of managing technological revelation while maintaining operational security and strategic advantages. The political implications of temporal exposure include international demands for temporal technology sharing, negotiations for temporal cooperation agreements, and conflicts over temporal technology control that threaten to destabilize international relations, while temporal authorities manage political responses through selective disclosure and influence operations. Your coordination with resistance organizations creates global networks dedicated to exposing temporal operations, while temporal authorities implement comprehensive counterintelligence operations to neutralize resistance effectiveness and prevent successful opposition to temporal control and technological secrecy. The public reaction to temporal revelations ranges from fascination and excitement to fear and anger, as populations struggle to understand the implications of temporal technology while processing the reality that their historical understanding and political autonomy have been systematically manipulated through temporal intervention. The temporal authority response includes escalated security measures, selective technology demonstration, and limited cooperation agreements that provide surface governments with restricted temporal access while maintaining temporal control over strategic capabilities and preventing complete loss of technological advantage. Your continued exposure activities reveal additional temporal capabilities, including consciousness manipulation, reality engineering, and dimensional control that exceed initial revelations, while demonstrating the comprehensive scope of temporal technology and its implications for understanding existence itself. The international negotiation processes include temporal technology sharing agreements, cooperation protocols, and oversight mechanisms that attempt to manage temporal technology integration, while temporal authorities maintain strategic control and prevent technology misuse that could threaten global stability. The resistance movement expansion includes recruitment of government officials, military personnel, and academic researchers who support temporal exposure, while temporal authorities implement infiltration and suppression operations to prevent resistance growth and maintain operational effectiveness. Your analysis of temporal authority responses reveals comprehensive contingency planning for exposure scenarios, including partial revelation strategies, technology demonstration programs, and integration timelines that suggest temporal authorities anticipated eventual exposure and prepared managed revelation processes. The long-term consequences of temporal exposure include fundamental changes in human understanding of technology, history, and civilization, while triggering technological development that could provide surface civilization with independent temporal capabilities that threaten temporal authority control and strategic advantages. The global transformation resulting from temporal revelation includes educational reforms, historical revision, and technological advancement that revolutionize human civilization while creating conflicts between temporal control and surface independence that could determine the future of human development. As you observe the global impact of temporal exposure, you begin to understand that revelation of temporal technology represents the most significant transformation in human civilization history, while triggering changes that will determine whether human development continues under temporal control or achieves independence through technological advancement. The realization that temporal exposure creates irreversible changes in human civilization, makes you recognize that your decision to reveal temporal operations has initiated fundamental transformation that will determine the future relationship between technological capability and human freedom throughout human civilization development. The aftermath of temporal exposure reveals cascading consequences that fundamentally alter global civilization. As governments struggle to adapt to temporal technology realities, while populations demand access to temporal capabilities that temporal authorities cannot provide without compromising operational security and strategic control over historical development. Your monitoring of global responses reveals that temporal exposure has created international crises as nations compete for temporal technology access while attempting to develop independent temporal capabilities that could provide strategic advantages in international relations and domestic control over their population's temporal access and historical understanding. The temporal authority adaptation strategies include selective technology sharing, controlled demonstration programs, and managed integration timelines that attempt to maintain strategic control while preventing global conflicts that could threaten both temporal operations and surface civilization stability through uncontrolled temporal technology proliferation. The scientific advancement acceleration resulting from temporal exposure includes research programs dedicated to understanding temporal technology while developing independent temporal capabilities that could provide surface civilization with freedom from temporal authority control and autonomous access to temporal manipulation technologies. Your analysis of global political changes reveals that temporal exposure has destabilized traditional international relations as governments reassess their strategic positions based on temporal technology implications, while developing new diplomatic relationships that reflect temporal technology access and cooperation agreements with temporal authorities. The social transformation consequences include fundamental changes in human understanding of history, technology, and civilization that affect education systems, cultural institutions, and social relationships as populations struggle to integrate temporal technology awareness with traditional beliefs and social structures. The economic implications of temporal exposure include market disruptions, technological advancement, and resource allocation changes that reflect temporal technology capabilities while creating new economic opportunities and challenges that exceed traditional economic understanding and management capabilities. Your investigation of resistance movement evolution reveals that temporal exposure has both strengthened and complicated resistance efforts, as increased public awareness supports resistance objectives, while temporal authorities implement more sophisticated suppression techniques that exploit public fascination with temporal technology. The temporal technology development competition includes international research programs, private technological development, and academic investigation that attempt to achieve independent temporal capabilities, while temporal authorities monitor and influence surface temporal research to prevent dangerous technological development. The cultural adaptation challenges include integrating temporal technology awareness with religious beliefs, philosophical understanding, and cultural traditions that were developed without knowledge of temporal manipulation and historical intervention capabilities that challenge fundamental assumptions about human agency and historical development. Your examination of temporal authority strategic responses reveals comprehensive adaptation programs that include public education initiatives, technology demonstration projects, and cooperation agreements designed to manage temporal exposure consequences while maintaining strategic control over temporal technology development and historical intervention capabilities. The international cooperation mechanisms include temporal technology sharing agreements, joint research programs, and oversight organizations that attempt to manage temporal technology integration while preventing conflicts that could threaten global stability through competitive temporal technology development and strategic temporal intervention. The educational system transformations include curriculum revisions, historical rewriting, and technological education programs that integrate temporal technology awareness while preparing populations for civilization that includes temporal capabilities as normal rather than extraordinary technological and historical intervention tools. Your analysis of long-term consequences reveals that temporal exposure has initiated irreversible changes in human civilization that will ultimately determine whether surface civilization achieves temporal technology independence or remains under temporal authority control through managed technological development and strategic intervention. The technological development trajectories include accelerated scientific advancement, independent temporal research, and international cooperation programs that could provide surface civilization with autonomous temporal capabilities, while temporal authorities attempt to maintain technological superiority and strategic control over temporal technology development. The social evolution implications include fundamental changes in human relationships, cultural development, and civilization structure that reflect temporal technology integration while creating new social challenges and opportunities that exceed traditional social understanding and management capabilities. As you observe the continuing consequences of temporal exposure, you begin to understand that revelation of temporal technology has created permanent transformation in human civilization that will determine the future relationship between technological capability and human freedom, while establishing new foundations for human development. The realization that temporal exposure consequences continue to evolve and expand makes you recognize that your decision to reveal temporal operations has initiated ongoing transformation that will influence human civilization development for generations, while creating both opportunities and challenges for human freedom and technological advancement. The long-term implications of temporal exposure extend far beyond immediate political and technological changes as human civilization grapples with fundamental questions about the nature of time, reality, and existence, while developing new philosophical, spiritual, and practical frameworks for understanding life in a universe where temporal manipulation is possible and historical development is negotiable. Your analysis of civilization transformation reveals that temporal technology awareness has created paradigm shifts in human thinking that affect every aspect of life, including personal relationships, career planning, and life goals, as individuals struggle to find meaning and purpose in a reality where past and future can be modified through technological intervention. The philosophical implications of temporal technology include fundamental questions about free will, moral responsibility, and the nature of existence, when historical events can be altered and personal histories can be modified through temporal intervention. The philosophical challenges exceed traditional human understanding while requiring new frameworks for ethical and moral reasoning. The spiritual consequences of temporal exposure include religious and spiritual movements that attempt to integrate temporal technology with traditional beliefs while developing new spiritual understanding that accommodates temporal manipulation capabilities and their implications for human souls, divine providence, and spiritual development. Your investigation of educational evolution reveals that temporal technology awareness has transformed learning and knowledge acquisition as students gain access to historical experience and future knowledge, while educators struggle to develop teaching methods that prepare students for civilization that includes temporal capabilities as normal rather than extraordinary. The psychological adaptation challenges include mental health issues related to temporal displacement anxiety, historical knowledge burden, and existential confusion, as individuals struggle to maintain psychological stability while processing the reality that their personal and collective histories may have been systematically manipulated through temporal intervention. The social relationship transformations include changes in family structures, community organizations, and interpersonal relationships that reflect temporal technology implications, while creating new social challenges related to temporal access, equity, historical truth, and personal identity verification. In contexts where personal histories can be modified, your examination of cultural development reveals that temporal exposure has accelerated artistic, literary, and cultural innovation, while creating new forms of cultural expression that incorporate temporal themes and capabilities, while preserving traditional cultural values and maintaining cultural continuity despite fundamental changes in civilization structure. The technological development acceleration includes rapid advancement in multiple scientific fields as researchers gain access to temporal technology principles while developing independent capabilities that could provide surface civilization with temporal technology, autonomy, and freedom from temporal authority control over technological development. The economic system adaptations include new financial instruments, business models, and economic theories that accommodate temporal technology capabilities while managing economic disruption and ensuring equitable access to temporal technology benefits throughout global populations and economic systems. Your analysis of political evolution reveals that temporal exposure has created new forms of governance, international relations, and political organization that reflect temporal technology realities, while attempting to maintain democratic principles and human rights in contexts where governmental authority could include temporal intervention capabilities. The global cooperation mechanisms include international organizations, research consortiums, and regulatory frameworks that attempt to manage temporal technology development while preventing conflicts and ensuring that temporal capabilities serve human welfare, rather than creating new forms of oppression or technological inequality. The resistance movement legacy includes ongoing efforts to preserve human freedom and self-determination while adapting resistance strategies to accommodate temporal technology realities and ensuring that human agency remains central to civilization development, despite technological capabilities that could eliminate human choice and autonomy. Your investigation of future possibilities reveals multiple potential trajectories for human civilization development that range from technological utopia under temporal authority guidance to independent human development with autonomous temporal capabilities while maintaining human freedom and self-determination as central values. The temporal authority adaptation includes strategic planning for civilization that incorporates surface populations as partners rather than subjects, while maintaining temporal technology advantages and ensuring global stability through cooperation rather than control and manipulation through technological superiority. The scientific understanding advancement includes new theoretical frameworks, experimental methodologies, and research programs that integrate temporal technology with conventional science, while developing comprehensive understanding of temporal mechanics and their implications for physics, biology, and consciousness research. As you consider the continuing legacy of temporal exposure, you begin to understand that revelation of temporal technology has initiated fundamental transformation in human civilization that will continue for generations, while creating both opportunities and challenges for human development and technological advancement. The realization that temporal legacy represents permanent change in human civilization makes you recognize that your decision to expose temporal operations has created irreversible transformation that will determine whether human development achieves freedom and autonomy or accepts security and advancement under technological authority throughout human civilization development. As you prepare to leave the Egyptian temporal facility and return to a surface world that will never be the same, you carry with you not just knowledge of temporal technology and historical manipulation, but profound understanding of the fundamental questions about human existence, technological development, and the relationship between individual freedom and collective responsibility that will influence every aspect of human civilization for generations to come. The temporal chambers stand as monuments to human potential and achievement, demonstrating that ancient civilizations possessed technological capabilities that exceed modern science, while creating social and management systems that maintain global stability through temporal intervention. The temporal achievements represent solutions to virtually every problem that contemporary society faces, from preventing warfare to managing environmental crises to ensuring technological development that serves human welfare. But the temporal facilities also represent profound questions about the cost of these achievements and whether technological advancement and global stability justify the elimination of human freedom and self-determination that temporal authority requires. The temporal success was achieved through secrecy, control, and manipulation that challenges fundamental assumptions about human rights, democratic governance, and the value of independence and autonomy in human development. Your exploration of the temporal facilities has revealed that human civilization includes dimensions of technological capability and historical manipulation that far exceed surface understanding, with advanced technologies that operate according to principles that contemporary science cannot comprehend, while influencing global development according to strategic objectives that prioritize long-term stability over short-term freedom. The choice between supporting temporal authority, objectives, and maintaining human independence represents more than personal preference or political position. It represents fundamental questions about what human civilization should become and whether technological advancement should take precedence over human agency and the right of populations to determine their own development through independent choice and democratic decision-making. The temporal authority offers genuine solutions to serious global problems, including environmental destruction, nuclear warfare, economic inequality, and social conflict, while requiring acceptance of external control and guidance that eliminates human autonomy and democratic self-governance. The temporal approach prioritizes collective welfare and long-term stability, while requiring surrender of individual and collective freedom. Human independence preserves democratic self-determination and individual freedom, while accepting greater risks of global catastrophe and slower progress towards solving immediate problems. The independence approach prioritizes human agency and democratic governance, while accepting responsibility for potential failures and disasters that could result from human mistakes and limitations. Your experience in the temporal facilities has provided unique insight into these fundamental tensions and the ways that different approaches to civilization development address different human needs while creating different benefits and costs. The temporal approach optimizes technological and social advancement while requiring acceptance of external authority. The independence approach preserves human freedom while accepting greater risks and challenges. The complexity of these choices reflects fundamental tensions between competing human values that cannot be easily reconciled or compromised. Security and freedom, technological advancement and self-determination, collective welfare, and individual rights all represent important human interests that sometimes conflict with each other in ways that require difficult decisions and trade-offs. As you consider the implications of temporal exposure and its consequences for human civilization, you recognize that your role in revealing temporal operations has influenced broader conflicts between different approaches to human development that will determine how human society evolves over coming centuries. The weight of this responsibility is balanced by understanding that your choices reflect your assessment of fundamental human values and priorities. The temporal facilities will continue to operate regardless of surface political decisions, maintaining their technological capabilities and strategic influence while adapting to new circumstances created by temporal exposure. The surface civilization will continue developing independent temporal capabilities while negotiating cooperation agreements that balance technological advancement with democratic autonomy. Your knowledge of temporal technology represents both opportunity and burden. Opportunity to contribute to human technological development and global problem solving, and burden of responsibility for using this knowledge in ways that serve broader human interests rather than narrow personal or political objectives. The challenge involves determining how to apply temporal understanding while remaining committed to human freedom and democratic values. The temporal chambers that were hidden for millennia have been exposed and documented, but their ultimate significance will be determined by how knowledge of their existence and capabilities influences future human development and the relationship between technological advancement and human freedom in democratic societies. As you emerge from the temporal facility and return to surface civilization, you carry understanding of technologies that could solve global problems and knowledge of capabilities that could enhance human life, while recognizing the ethical and political challenges involved in applying temporal technology within democratic frameworks that preserve human freedom and self-determination. The secret Egyptian temporal chambers represent both human achievement and human challenge. Achievement in demonstrating technological capabilities that exceed contemporary understanding, and challenge in determining how to integrate temporal technology with human values that prioritize freedom, democracy, and self-determination over security and technological advancement through external control. Your exploration has revealed that human potential far exceeds contemporary achievements, but realizing this potential requires choices about values and priorities that will determine whether technological advancement enhances human freedom or replaces democratic self-governance with technological authority that prioritizes efficiency and stability over individual rights and collective autonomy. The temporal technology you discovered represents the ultimate test of human civilization's ability to balance technological capability with democratic values, while ensuring that advanced technology serves human freedom rather than eliminating the independence and self-determination that define human dignity in democratic society. Welcome to understanding that the future of human civilization depends not just on technological advancement, but on wisdom, courage, and commitment to preserving human freedom while applying technological capabilities in ways that enhance rather than replace the democratic values and individual rights that make human life meaningful and worth preserving for future generations.